Welcome to this edition of Security and Compliance Weekly. We're extremely excited to be joined today by Dr. Casey Marks, who is recently appointed the Chief Qualifications Officer for the International Information Systems Security Certification Consortium, or as you may know it, ISC squared. And yes, I did have to look up what ISC squared actually stood for. And yes, I now have a deeper appreciation for why they're so adamant about the placement of the parentheses in their nomenclature. At any rate, Casey is going to facilitate a discussion with us today and give us the official perspective on things like the utility and efficacy of certifications for the cybersecurity community and answer all of our questions about the state and place of certifications in our world. I'm sure we're not bringing any questions or arguments to the table that Casey hasn't heard before, but we're very interested in getting some of the official perspective on things that we spend quite a bit of time sort of musing about amongst ourselves and on the main show. If you've got questions that you'd like us to cover, please throw them into the Discord server and we'll try to pass them along. At any rate, we're looking forward to an informative and engaging chat today, so join us as we continue our journey of tearing down silos and building bridges on Security and Compliance Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production. And now, it's the show that bridges the requirements of regulations, compliance, and privacy with those of security. Your trusted source for complying with various mandates, building effective programs, and current compliance news. It's time for Security and Compliance Weekly.
Welcome to episode 77 of Security and Compliance Weekly, recorded on June 22nd, 2021. I'm your host, Mr. Jeff Mann, and joining me today are my certifiable co-hosts, Mr. Scott Lyons and Mr. Josh Marpet. Sirs, welcome.
Going to be a fun conversation today, Jeff.
It is.
Oh, yeah.
Let us get some announcements out of the way and we will jump into the discussion. If you want to stay in the loop on all things Security Weekly, you can do so by going to securityweekly.com/subscribe. And there you can subscribe on your favorite podcast catcher or on our YouTube channel. You can sign up for our mailing list. You can join our Discord server, or you can join us on our new live streaming platform, which isn't new anymore. We've been on it for a couple months now, Twitch. Also, Security Weekly is ecstatic to announce that Security Weekly Unlocked will be held in person this December 5th through 8th at the Hilton Lake Buena Vista in Florida. Call for presentations and early registration for Security Weekly listeners is now open. You can find all about it by going to securityweekly.com/unlocked. Submit your presentation, register, get the early registration prices before it expires. All right. We've all participated in, and I'm sure you've heard many grumblings about the merits of certification, especially in our industry, where they place in level of importance, and this is where we've had more serious discussions about where certification falls between education and training and experience. You know, the discussions we've had about, you know, how do people get into this industry, advance in this industry, grow in this industry. I've, for a long time, wanted to get kind of the official perspective from one of the certification organizations, and I am very excited to announce that we finally got a taker on my request, and so we are joined today by Casey Marks. As I mentioned in the lead-in, he is the Chief Qualifications Officer at ISC Squared. Please don't ever make me say that again, what it stands for again. Casey, welcome to Security and Compliance Weekly.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. And trust me, I will never ask you to say it again because I can hardly remember it myself. It is a mouthful. It's been around for a long time, but I am really happy to be here. I'm really happy to talk about certifications, or as we're now recently calling them qualifications because it's bigger than just certifications. But I'm happy to entertain all types of questions.
So you're rebranding. That's sign of a tired and stale organization when you have to rebrand your product. But we'll get
constantly evolving. Constantly evolving.
Gotcha.
Jeff.
Well, let me level set for a minute, and I'll turn it over to the wolves. My particular disdain for certifications comes from the fact that I cut my teeth at the National Security Agency and learned how to do information security from an organization whose business was information security, promoting the national security and national defense and so on and so forth. But I realize that there's only a few thousand people that can lay hold to that claim. And not even all of them are have the experience that I did, but that's another story. But in terms of everybody else and the general population. Oh, and I also happen to be in at the ground floor of sort of the internet and internet security and what now we know as cybersecurity. So certifications have never been for me. But I understand that they're necessary, and I really was interested and am interested in sort of getting the official view, the official take, and starting from way back at the beginning. So hopefully you can give us a little bit of a history lesson today. But before we jump into it, this is Security and Compliance Weekly, and we ask all of our guests the same start-off question, which is what we call the hot seat question. So let me get this out of the way, because we're all eager to just sort of jump in and bash all the certifications. So in the context of this show, where we're trying to bridge the gap between security people and compliance people, and people that don't always see eye to eye, and certainly think that there's this very often think there's this chasm between these two concepts. No right or wrong answer, but just simply where do you fall on sort of this, what we like to call the security versus compliance continuum?
Thanks. I'm not going to fall for your tricks. I've seen your show. I've seen you talk about this. I've done my homework, but I'm going to approach it slightly differently, and I'm going to talk about it from a user and maybe tangential in terms of the expertise. And I'm not going to look to be as discordant, perhaps, and talk about compliance and security. I feel, from our perspective, especially from a training and certification standpoint, which is probably most relevant here, is that security and being secure is an aspirational end state that one probably never achieves if they're being honest with themselves or their environment.
Nicely said.
And compliance is a means towards that end. That at every step of the way, you have lots of experts that, given their experience, will come through and they will codify things, they will characterize things, they will document things, and they will have compliance mechanisms, which hopefully get you to a point of feeling secure, even if you're not truly secure.
Feeling secure, even if you're not truly secure. Interesting. Wrong, but no, just kidding. Certainly, absolutely wrong. But there's a lot of times where we feel secure given what we know, because it's what we don't know that is the threats that are right behind us. Right in front of us. You're talking about the Johari window of what you know, what you don't know. Yeah, no, trust me, we're on the same page. But and so the Johari window, for those that might not understand it, is a 4-pane window. There's things you know, things you don't know, things you don't know, and the scariest of all is things that you don't know you don't know.
So you're talking about like the was it false positive, positive positive, false, that kind of stuff?
Similar, but it's more along the line. That is one of the Johari window, I think, examples. But in this case, it's more about knowledge. And, the feeling of security is great, but the reality of security is far more complex. And that, I believe, is what our guest was saying. And I totally agree. And as far as compliance goes, seeing it from the viewpoint of security, it's an enabler for compliance is what I mean, am I characterizing what you said correctly?
Yes. So taking it out of the context of the specifics with regard to the question is related to the discipline. Compliance can mean many different things. I live in a compliance world that has I shouldn't say absolutely nothing, but where security is significantly diminished. But we all have compliance requirements that we must live with. So there's within this context, absolutely. I just feel like it's a step along the way, but it's certainly it's necessary but not sufficient.
No, that compliance is necessary but not sufficient. Security is necessary but not sufficient.
There you go.
There's also the factor, you have to factor in the business. Without business, security doesn't get paid for. Details.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, with small
so they all interrelate.
Let's jump into it at least on script a little bit for as long as that's going to last. Casey, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into I want to say how you got into cybersecurity, but you're in certification, so you're not.
I'm not.
How you got to where you are today with ISC Squared? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Young boy growing up in Chicago. Oh no, probably not that far. So with regard to who I am, cut to the chase. So I'm not a cybersecurity expert, would never pretend to be one, and probably good for you all that I'm not. I'm a psychometrician by training, so my background is in applied statistics, educational applied statistics, psychometrician. They do exist. You can look them up. Educational and psychological measurement. So for those who are outside the certification space, whether it be things like Stanford Binet, the Wonderlic exam that you may have heard about, or the ACT, SAT, any of those standardized exams that you may have had to negotiate at some point in your life along your educational or psychological development, someone has to deal with the numbers behind it. You have content experts, so psychologists and educators and what have you, and in our case, cybersecurity experts. But then you have to have someone who knows the numbers and to be able to make sure that you're measuring what you're expecting to measure and it's fair, valid, and reliable. And that's what a psychometrician does. And I've been doing it for, at this point, almost 25 years. I've been a psychometrician at this point. Have done it for the National Licensure Exam for Nursing, language testing, and a number of different disciplines in addition to cybersecurity. But got into this field and this discipline with ISC Squared about 6 years ago. And most notably in that time was to transition the CISSP from a linear exam to a computerized adaptive exam.
You know,
how's that working out for you so far?
Not too bad. Not too bad at all. Thank you. Actually working out very well.
So you've been with ISC2 for 6 years. Thank you for coming on the show and being a guest, by the way. Yeah. My question directly to you is about COVID and what's been going on. In the past, we've been pushing in as an industry certification, get your certs, right? Mm-hmm. We've also morphed that into the degree gets you the job, the certs get you the money. There have been many maturations of this. Since COVID, have you seen, and I'm speaking more towards directly the CISSP because that seems to be the monument of management certifications. Have you seen a decline in, like a massive decline in actual CISSP versus associate CISSP? And for those of you who are listening that don't know what I'm talking about, the actual CISSP requires a minimum of 5 years practical experience or a degree plus so much time versus the associate where you may not have all of the time requirement, but you know the material to pass the test. Have you, what have the metrics looked like around the last year? Have you seen a lot of people pouring money into certifications, or has it been sort of wishy-washy along the year?
No, it's not been wishy-washy, but it's actually this tide has lifted all boats. I can say across the board, as you're probably very familiar with, the interest in cybersecurity as a discipline and a profession for people who are maybe on traditional pathways and people who are non-traditional pathways is off the charts. The interest in these certifications and quite honestly in education, whether it be the certs being CISSP or otherwise, or the pathway of the associate or the traditional pathway, interest is off the charts. And I think during COVID, most people, I'm speaking to a very US-centric perspective here, but a lot of people who would have been in the office, all of a sudden they're at home. All of the issues that have been in the popular press with regard to security incidents that have become much more prevalent, risks, endpoint risks that people never really contemplated previously, all of a sudden became manifest. And all of a sudden, this became an area where, wow, this is a hot industry. There's a lot going on, lots of press. I want to get in on this too. And so the demand has been across the board up.
I literally had somebody come to me and say, is that why we have so much ransomware now? Because people are bored and getting certifications in security?
Gosh, wow, that would be a great training opportunity, right? I would hope not. I have a really strong feeling that, and I can't validate this, so I apologize, that most of the people involved in the ransomware attacks are probably not our certification holders. I'm pretty definite in that, but
at least you're
without further investigation.
I believe you because never mind. I'm not going to go there. I promise to try to be nice.
No, don't be nice. No, I don't want nice. No one wants nice. We want honest, right? We want fun.
Okay, so if you don't want nice, then I guess I'll hit you with the question that I hit you with prior to us going on air.
Yeah.
Why do so many people feel in the industry that ISC2 has built a product that has cornered the market and monopolized the certification industry? Now, I get that there's SANS, I get that there are other certifications that are out there, but it really feels like for people to be able to have maturity in their career, maturity and growth, everybody points to the CISSP, and some people view that as a monopoly.
It wouldn't be a monopoly, but let me set that aside. Let me give you a little context, a little history, and a little background here, and I will answer your question directly on that. There's a reason why CISSP has gotten to the position that it has right now, and that's because in lieu of other market forces, a vacuum, in this case, CISSP exists for a reason. It has been attended to because of the failure of and the lack of other mechanisms to train, educate, and prepare individuals in this space. So ISC Squared has been around since 1989. The CISSP has been around since 1994. I don't think anyone is going to suggest that that's when the first concerns with regard to information security came about. However, it is the first time, at least within the very narrow perspective of certification, that someone actually thought about trying to quantify and have some professional recognition of knowledge, skills, and abilities, and the wherewithal to deploy them in a way that would give an external signaling to someone that they knew what they were talking about. I think that in general, if I was to back up a little bit further and say that this is just one of a number of failures with regard to, let's just say, higher education and workforce development globally, which has been most acute in IT and IT-related fields, which in this case, I'll speak to cybersecurity being one, where college degrees and formal education, and even further from their apprenticeship programs and those types of opportunities were not recognized or understood as fast as technology demanded. And certs became the easiest way to be able to have some level of competence assurance to be able to demonstrate knowledge, skills, and abilities. And I think that you see this across the board in all types of professional domains. So we're not different, but with regard to your very, very specific question, monopoly, I don't believe we are. I believe there are a number of worthy certifications out there, but I do believe that there's a testament to the rigor, the long-standing development, and the quality that goes into our products that would to make them be aspirational and to maybe give the perception of being monopolistic.
So what you're talking about is the exam development life cycle. And Gus, if you have that infographic, this would be a really good time to cue that. There we go, right there. Perfect.
Yes,
this
sir.
is what I was talking about prior to us opening on air. I was looking around doing a lot of research on you, on ISC2, on how things are moving. And I came across this infographic and I'm like, this is absolutely picture perfect for people to understand what it takes to develop something at the caliber of the CISSP or other certifications that ISC2 puts out. And really, for those of you who are listening and not viewing, what we're talking about is the life cycle of how an exam develops, right? So everything from the job task analysis all the way through item writing and then on to publishing. Casey, can you dive into this and talk about ISC2's methodology? Utilizing the exam development lifecycle that's pictured here, and why you guys pour so much time into research and item mapping and make that an iterative process.
Absolutely, I appreciate this opportunity. So this is what I live on a daily basis, and this is, as I said specifically, not being
a cybersecurity expert, but being a test development and psychometrician practitioner, this is what we live with, right? And so ISC Squared, we are a not-for-profit association, a membership organization, which serves the needs of the members. Primarily, you must be certified. Currently, you must be certified to be a member. To be a member, you are certified. So they are one and the same. That is how the organization it started. That's how it was developed. With regard to the specifics of the life cycle, we do mimic practices that are endemic to high stakes examination development. As I said, I worked in nursing for a long time. So whether it be nursing, medicine, law, established licensed professions have a very rigorous methodology of which the graphic depicts. And we utilize many of the same. And so what's key in this is that the amount that an individual pays on an annual basis to maintain their certification, a good portion of those maintenance fees goes into developing the current and future versions of that cert such that it has relative utility moving forward. So if you look at that graphic, and for those who can't see it, I'll give a description. It starts with something called the job task analysis. And so on a triennial basis, for each one of the certs, and I'll just speak specifically to CISSP, we go through and find out what people are doing in the field. What is important? So frequency and importancy. What is important and how often it's happening. And we have lots of KSAs, as they're called, to be able to go through and knowledge, skills, and abilities, to go ahead and understand and have a description of what professional practice looks like. We validate that with the opportunity of all of our members and public comment to understand this is what goes into the blueprint of the examination. From that point, there's validation. Once we have something that the examination blueprint creates are the domains or the major structures of the exam, what we do is we have groups of individuals, experts who are from our membership who are all volunteers. So it's never somebody at ISC Squared determining what the exam is. It's always a consensus-driven model from the membership. And what they do is they come together and they come to agreements. It should be more of this, less of that. One good example would be is that in CISSP there used to be some time ago, like as I said, it's been around since '94. Physical security in the CISSP was a significant portion of a domain. Now it is a very, very minor component, despite the fact that it's still in the certified common body of knowledge. But so it still exists. But when people think about what you expect from a CISSP and a certified member, you don't think about physical security so much. Not that it's not important, it's just not the most predominant thing. You can't test everything, you have to be able to focus, and that's what an exam blueprint does. From there, you write, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, this is all very fascinating because I have for most of my career just avoided any detailed look into certifications, but what you said just struck me a little bit that sure. If someone like me has an opinion that people that hold CISSPs, generally speaking, are of lesser ability, lesser caliber, not necessarily reflecting the type of skill sets that I think are important with the industry, and if I heard you correctly, those people that are holding CISSP are also approving the test and improving the test and the certification as it goes on. Isn't that sort of a self-perpetuating? You're always going to stay at a certain level. Granted that it might be a perceived level that I have, but there seems to be a logic flaw in there somewhere.
So that's a great point. And if, as exactly described, it would be, there's a little bit more to it, but you are correct, and it actually doesn't exactly have that impact. So if we were to, it can be a completely closed loop where you must be a CISSP to inform future CISSP and future, current CISSP with the future, if it's a completely closed loop, we would have that. Actually, what happens is the close the door mechanism. What happens is that we have individuals who, once they get the credential, they want it to be harder for everybody else that follows them. And so in that case, it is a challenge to go ahead and ensure that it stays
fair and rigorous for the intended level of the entry practitioner. But to that point, yes. However, we also seek external feedback. We have stakeholders from across dimensions. So it's not just CISSP. We start with them. We start with those people saying, you know what a CISSP is. You are one. You probably interact with one. You understand what the demands of the cert should be within a practitioner role. We start there, and then we add to it.
But I don't know if it's a good analogy or not, but the term that keeps popping into my head is inbreeding. And most
not a bad idea.
That's a good thing. I mean, I'm all kidding aside, but that's what I'm hearing you say, that there's a certain amount of inbreeding that, produces something less than what's desired.
Right.
But okay, so that said, you've talked a little bit about the monopoly or not. Certainly, because of a certain compliance discipline that I'm involved with, that several years ago determined that table stakes for being an assessor in this particular discipline. All right, I'll just say it, PCI. Back, I want to say it was 7 or 8 years ago, the PCI Council declared it was always desirable that you would have certification, and they would declare CISSP. At some point, they said, no, you have to have a CISSP certification to be a QSA. Conveniently, I wasn't a QSA at the time, so it was a non-issue for me. I was just simply a subject matter expert working for a vendor at the time. But I guess my question is, how did the CISSP certification in particular become, and we've been discussing a little bit on the Discord as well, become sort of the table stakes? It seems like a lot of HR, departments at a lot of companies, the first filter you have to go through is you have to have CISSP.
When you're talking about that, like HR, there have been so many recruiters that have said, well, you need the CISSP. Well, CISSP has been out for 5 years, but you need the CISSP, and you must have had it for 10 years. And we're like, wait, what? How did this become a thing?
Yeah, would you be surprised if I told you that we don't necessarily like that? And by the way, I can augment the same situation where we often have individuals, and I'll characterize it slightly differently, not by content area, but I'll just talk by the seniority, very junior positions, right, where it's someone just entering the profession, and the requirement to CISSP is completely inappropriate. It is overstated, but it is a matter of convenience, and it's more a reflection of the entire industry, the preparation of the industry in general. The lag with regard to formal education, maybe of available alternate mechanisms. CISSP, of course, hey, I'm biased. We are talking about our bias. I believe it's a good product. I do believe it serves a purpose, but it's not fit for every single purpose, right? But to your point, how did it get there? So your primary question. So how did we get here? And if we got to look internally at the industry. So ISC Squared and CISSP has filled a need. There was a void there that was filled. How did it get that way? You could say lack of alternatives. We are at ISC Squared. I can tell you right now, we don't believe this is the only mechanism. So believe it or not, ISC Squared is not CISSP. We are much larger than that. We have much broader initiatives because we don't believe just getting a CISSP is going to get enough people into this space to fit society's needs.
Well, I mean, they added the letter H, so they've learned that there are more letters in the alphabet.
Oh, you are absolutely correct. That I'm not going to touch that one.
Okay. The real world, in the real world side, let's ask a couple of quick questions. We said we're not really going to talk about competitors, and we're not. But what I do want to talk about is I want to go back, rather than talking about the industry, I want to talk about your background as a psychometrician for a minute. And I want to discuss what the CISSP or what ISC Squared would be like without such a focus on psychometrics. How important do you see that as part of your process, and what does it do for the process?
Well, I can tell you one thing. You would not be discussing the words ISC squared or CISSP and monopoly in the same sentence. I can tell you that. So rigor is extremely important. It surprises me. I come across certifications, in some cases certificates. So if you want to start pushing my button, let's talk about the difference between certificates and certifications within the cybersecurity and information technology space. But without a focus on, as we're going down the road with test development and all the processes that go behind that, and the psychometrics, the actual the ability to quantify the reliability of the result, which is exactly what we mean by that. So when we talk about a pass rate and a reliability, it means that someone taking a test upon a repeated administrations will get the same result, will get the same outcome, because that's what's expected statistically. Without the focus that we have in those areas, it would be a paper cert. It wouldn't mean anything. And I know that argument will always be out there. It is not industry specific. I used to get the same questions in nursing. That why is it, today I'm not a good nurse, but tomorrow I take the NCLEX and all of a sudden I'm qualified to be a registered nurse. It's the same idea. It's part of the process. It's not the only piece to the process. And I think that's important, especially with CISSP, is it isn't just the exam. The exam is incredibly important, but it is part of a larger process.
So, I mean, so there's the exam, there's the what is it, the vouching of somebody else?
So I'll run through it. So you have prerequisites, right? You have educational and employment prerequisites. There's something called, there's obviously the successful navigation of the exam. There's endorsement, that someone has to be able to endorse you to be certified, a certain level of personal attestation. And there, of course, there's the ethical canons. And then beyond that, and I think what's really important from a certification standpoint, and I'm going to bring up this little topic again, certification versus certificate. Certification is an ongoing process. There's a continuous quality concept with regard to maintenance over time. Yes.
Okay.
CPEs. And CPEs. I am a CISSP holder, and I am getting CPE certification for this talk right here.
and I now think less of you, Scott.
You can put
that's
in
okay,
for
Mr. PCI.
You can self-assess. You can self-certify for the one, or self-attest for the 1 hour, and that'll work. We had to do that for. Okay, so now I'm going to get a little.
Yes, sir.
It's a little bit longer. It's a little bit longer than an hour.
Let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back and continue the conversation. I want you to keep asking your questions, Josh, but I want to try to frame it up a little bit. So we'll take a break real quick.